Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. The name of the podcast is When Society Differs. Don't ask why. It was just a quick name that I came up with for this project. Anyways, and as you can see, I have a guest speaker today, Lacey Ash. And they've decided to join me because, I didn't want this podcast to be that boring. I decided me just sitting here rambling off facts and evidence would get kind of repetitive, and I thought it would be great to bounce off ideas with somebody. So, Lacey, how is your day going so far?
My day's been going good. This is definitely an interesting start to the morning.
Yes, I would say it's you know, having to record a podcast on a Saturday is definitely not something you do every day.
No, but at the same time, I would definitely think that it's much better than doing it during the week. So
Yes.
you're much more relaxed while speaking than you would be if you were imagining all these other different things that you have to do.
Yes, doing it on a Saturday allows me, like you said, I'm not as stressed out, I suppose. Um, Anyways, okay, so let me just give you guys a quick rundown of what we're going to do in this podcast. So I'm going to try and argue a point as to why, or the topic in question is, are musically trained people more successful in life? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I have, after thorough research and many different thoughts on this, I have an idea. But Lacey, let me ask you, do you know anything about this topic thus far? Or are you just coming in here kind of blind-eyed?
I am a bit, yeah, I have no idea what this topic really would mean, I suppose. Like, I do play instruments, but I've never thought of that as something that could make me more successful in life.
I see where you're coming from. And then, do you, if you had to choose, what would you say your opinion would be? Would it just be just a yes or no question? Would it be yes or no?
Oh gosh, yes or no? I want to choose like maybe. I think it really depends on like how you would use that. Cuz if you're going into like engineering or something, I don't feel like that would help you as much. But
Mm,
if if you were going into something that was more creative per se, you probably could figure out how to make music help you.
yeah, I think. Well, I think you're correct about that. Oh, you know what? I'll not get too far into it because I'm going to explain it later. Talking about explaining it, let me start off with my claim about what I think. So, based on evidence and thorough research, I can say with confidence that I do not believe that being musically trained makes you more successful in life because of flaws in studies and the subjective nature of the question at hand. So, to put it into simpler terms, what I'm basically saying is I don't believe given being musically trained, while it does have some advantages that we'll get into later, I don't believe that it will necessarily make you more successful in life due to subjectiveness of the question in terms and some flaws in the possible studies that we're going to look into. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's begin with. So this is from this website is. Hold on, I might mess up the pronunciation, but this is from artsedsearch.org. And the name of the article, give me a second to open it real quick. It is Does musical training improve school performance? So in this article, as you can see, it's mentioned that there are definitely some flaws that these studies have included. Because at least one of the major flaws that I found while researching was that there's technically no way to tell if musicians have a higher IQ, if it's due to being musical, or if it's just due to the students who enrolled in these lessons, if they just had a higher motivation factor or prior academic success. And so to further build on that, I'd say that there definitely have been studies that have showed musicians typically have higher IQs. There's definitely no denying that. But you have to also look at the fact that these people initiating the studies have they just don't know if these test subjects were more motivated than the other subjects. If you have some subjects who aren't musically trained that just didn't have as much motivation as those who were more motivated, is that's gonna affect the results, and it's something that just wasn't taken into account. And then I'd like to continue with an analogy. If so, imagine that you're just taking a nice stroll in your neighborhood. The sun's shining, the birds are chirping. It's just a normal day. And then you come across a musician playing on the street. And then you say, for context, that this musician is actually the smartest person in the entire world. I know, probably isn't going to happen to you. If it does happen, you have some extreme luck. Anyways, if they are the smartest in the person in the world, are we going to automatically assume that this is because they're a musician? I would not. I wouldn't think that just because I see somebody playing music on an instrument such as the violin, piano, etc., that this is what made them more successful than somebody who is walking on the other side of the street without just not playing an instrument. Okay. And then Lacey, do you have any comments on this about what you think?
I think I definitely agree with the points you brought up. Like, if you just walked up to someone random who you didn't know and didn't give any sort of context to and asked them if being musically trained could make you more successful in life, I feel like they would say no, because, like, if you think about it, knowing how to read music or play an instrument, like, that has nothing really to do with math or science when you get into whatever career you're going into. It has to do more with an art style, I suppose you'd say. So,
Mhm.
depending on what
Like,
you're going into, the art style doesn't really have anything to do with it.
yeah. Okay, yeah, because I suppose like you said, art style. I feel that being, at least from personal experience, I feel that playing an instrument, it allows you to be more creative, but I'm not sure if that creativeness necessarily applies to being more successful in life, as you were kind of saying. Um, okay. Now, so for this next piece of evidence, I wanted to bring up the idea that there's overall, I've looked at many resources. One of them is from finallyfamilyhomes.org. This talks about 10 keys to the key points to success. And then I've also looked at the Merriam-Webster dictionary's definition of what success is. And like you would assume, they're different. So being successful, or there's no definitive definition of what it means to be successful. So when we're talking about what makes somebody more successful in life, we need to have a clear cut definition of what successful is, but there is no cut definition like that. So what I'm trying to say is being called successful could mean so many different things. As I mean, who am I to say that somebody who has a much lower income than I or my family isn't as successful as we are just because of the different money income? Like they could live a life full of love, happiness, joy, and consider themselves to be just as successful as me. So when we're really trying to say, are musically trained people more successful in life, I just can't see how being musically trained would correlate to how you would be more successful. Okay, Lacey, any further thoughts on this?
I do not.
No. Well, that was just my thought, because I don't see, I don't really see how any, I mean, maybe my opinion would change if there was a clear-cut definition of what successful was, but due to the fact that there's not, I just really can't see it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Lacey, before we begin the next piece of evidence and reasoning, I'd like to ask you, do you think that having a high IQ makes someone smarter?
Oh.
Just this is just
Um,
based off nothing, just what your first thought is.
I think I don't really think so. Like, cause I think because you can improve your IQ after a while, which means that it's not necessarily a measure of how much you can learn. It's almost how much you've retained and how quickly you can use that knowledge. So just because I'm older, I would be smarter than someone younger than me, I'm sure, but that doesn't mean that they aren't smart. They're still a bright kid, I'm sure. They just don't know all the things that you learn as you get older. So I don't think it's necessarily the IQ that makes someone smart. It's
Yeah, I
probably a
suppose
combination of things.
actually really see what you're saying there because as I've gone deeper into this topic of what IQ actually is, it turns out that IQ may not actually be that great of a re that it may not be that good of a way to tell if people are smart. So take for instance, this is from sciencemag.org that I found this piece of evidence. So this we're kind of taking into account a motivation factor again, because motivation, I feel that motivation definitely has an effect on how people do in life and tests. So this is, I believe this is I'm paraphrasing what the article said here, but this is a general idea. While people who have a higher IQ tend to do better in terms of academic success, new studies have shown that the score one receives on the test may only reflect how motivated they were to get a good score on it. Hence, this would completely eliminate the factor of someone having a higher IQ being smarter or more intelligent than someone who has a lower score. So, and to put it in perspective, um, let me just generalize this statement by saying when most people think of, at least when I started this topic, I thought as being successful as having a high IQ or just being smart in life. But then, is there any point in calling yourself successful if it turns out that having a high IQ doesn't necessarily mean in terms that you're going to be successful? So the motivation factor definitely is just something in the test that is going to be dependent. So, and then continuing, hold on. I think that it's another piece of evidence that I found. There was this idea, it was this idea that when, sorry, give me a second. I believe it was this idea that despite somebody having a high IQ, it was despite somebody having a high IQ. No, that's just, sorry. This just goes back to the motivation factor because is somebody who's not here. I'll give you an analogy to try to make it more simple. When somebody who has, so say you look at somebody again who has a higher IQ, and then there's somebody else who has a lower IQ. Oh, I remember now. It also depends on different scenarios. The IQ test only measures or only tests you on different scenarios. So if you have somebody who's great at the scenarios put in the IQ on the IQ test, and there's another person who isn't great at the scenarios put in the IQ test, how are you gonna differentiate that difference, or how are you gonna make it even? So because the person who had a lower IQ can be just as great in different scenarios as somebody who has a higher IQ. And I think that's what I was mainly trying to say with how IQ may not measure the smartness and how it may not be a good reason to call somebody successful. Okay, now, Lacey, any more thoughts on that?
I I honestly didn't even think about having thoughts. I was kind of just listening and thinking. I've never really thought of it being like scenarios itself before, but I think that's definitely a good point because if someone wasn't good in one scenario, but they were good in another similar scenario, except that scenario wasn't in the IQ test, they would be seen as not as smart, but they really are equally as smart.
So that those were just my main thoughts on, like I said before, why IQ may not be a good measure. And then to kind of wrap it all up, we have so many people who oppose me in saying that being musical does actually make you successful. There's take this one study from this is from Clara E. James of the website ncbi.lmm, sorry if I butchered that, .nih.gov. So this is a direct quote from what the article found from their study. Support for a training-related component to musicians' enhanced neural response to sound may be gleaned for longitudinal work. Preschoolers undergoing music lessons demonstrate more precise neural timing to speech in the presence of noise following 1 year of continued development in musical training, whereas preschoolers engaged in non-musical activity show no measurable change. Okay, so what this is saying is that preschoolers who tend to have or who have been developing their brain in musical lessons tend to have a better neural response than those preschoolers who don't. So, and to that, I just have to say, I have to remind you once more of what it truly means to be successful. As this is a quote from Merriam-Webster, what it defines successful as. It's defined as a favorable or desired outcome. So are we just going to say that because preschoolers have been shown to have a better neural response, or that's one of the advantages of being musical, are we really going to say that it's a desired outcome, or it's a more favorable outcome over somebody who isn't? I mean, sure, I suppose you could say there are definitely advantages to being musical. At the same time, does having better neural response, just one thing, necessarily make you more successful in life? I just throughout all my research, I really can't see it making you more successful in life. And this kind of ties in with what I said before about those families who necessarily uh, don't have the same outcome as somebody who makes more money. Who's to say that they aren't that isn't the desired outcome they wished for? Who's to say they aren't just as happy as they are? Okay, and now that we finally wrap that up, I would like to ask you, Lacey, do you have any final thoughts on this topic?
Final thoughts that contradict or support what you said? Don't think so. I can say that I was fascinated the whole time because I've never thought to do research on that particular topic, and especially the IQ tests, like what I've heard and just looking at your own supposed smartness like that, it makes it seem less, oh no, I'm stupid or something like that. Like,
Yeah, I will say I was pleasantly surprised when I did my research upon the IQ stuff, as I had no idea. I just always automatically assumed that somebody with a higher IQ was always going to be smarter than somebody who wasn't. But I suppose this shows that just because you have a higher number on a page doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be smarter than somebody who has a lower number. And I think to finally wrap it all up, I'd like to thank you, Lacey, for coming to this podcast. I hope you've enjoyed your time, and I hope you learned some valuable information about why I do not believe that being musically trained necessarily makes people more successful in life. And to you, the audience, I hope you have a nice day. I hope you or night. Um, and thank you for listening to the podcast. Maybe I'll see you again, maybe I won't. I don't know. Maybe I'll do some more research on another topic. Anyways, farewell. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.